Up next, we have someone who is probably the only people who has the authority to speak about the legality of blockchain and its regulations in India. And the regulations of blockchain in India is a very, um, you know, controversial topic, let's put it that way, because there isn't exactly a regulation, but it's been advised that there be put in place. Um, so what the applications of like this advisory pulling through could mean big things for India and could mean big things for blockchain to take off in India. And for that, we are going to have Dr. Pavan Duggal, who's a Supreme Court lawyer, and he's also the chairman of the Commission of Cybersecurity. And he's a very big authority in the cyber space, basically. And unfortunately, we couldn't have him in person here, but we're going to do a teleconference with him, and we're going to have him give us his talk through video call. And we're going to get that set up right now.
No, there's some problem. We can't. Sorry? Voice is audible? Do you need to start? Yeah, I just want to talk. Hi, good afternoon to all of you. It's a pleasure to connect you via this technological bridge. I would have loved to be with you in person, except because of my matter here, I could not come out of the Delhi courts. Well, first and foremost, my congratulations to the conference for addressing this very important issue. Full stop. I have been asked to specifically deal with the issue pertaining to blockchain and its legalities in India. If you are a blockchain enthusiast, or if you are a stakeholder in the blockchain ecosystem, then you often find yourself coming across with conflicting signals in India. Why? Because there's not substantial clarity. Blockchain was going on fine, bitcoins were going up and about, and the post demonetization had seen massive growth in the price and volatility of blockchain, specifically in the form of bitcoins. But then, subsequently, what effectively happened in the budget of 2018 effectively put far more conflicting signals. The finance minister, in his budget speech, categorically stated that bitcoins are not going to be legal tender. On the same side, we did find that the government announced that blockchain would be encouraged as an emerging technology. So people were more confused because bitcoins are based on blockchains. So you are only, shall I say, legally stopping a application, but you want to focus on the bigger technology being blockchain. Thereafter, we have been seeing various initiatives within the government so as to go ahead and give further impetus to blockchains. We find that the government of Andhra Pradesh is currently in a process of transmigrating its land records to the blockchain. We also find various other electronic governance initiatives focusing on blockchain. But the issue that comes up for consideration is blockchain legal? And if so, what is the basis for the same? We need to appreciate that today afternoon, when we are talking, India does not have any dedicated law on blockchain. The Parliament of India has not passed any law on the specific subject of blockchain. Having said that given the absence of a specific law, we will have to look at other broad legal provisions to find out whether they can be applicable to blockchain. So we have to turn back to the Indian Information Technology Act 2000, being the Indian Cyberlaw. Mind you, the Indian Cyberlaw effectively was passed almost 20 years back, which is many years prior to the establishment and the adoption of blockchain. However, the IT Act, even when it was amended in 2008, had not taken cognizance of this emerging technology because it was only beginning to emerge. But today, the way the Information Technology Act stands, it's very clear that the IT Act is directly applicable to blockchains. This is so because blockchain as a technology is ultimately using blocks of information. These blocks are containing nothing but data and information in the electronic form. These blocks are resident on computer resources and often communication devices as well. These blocks of information can be accessed by any member of the public. So ultimately, blockchain can be seen nothing but a paradigm of use of computers, computer systems, computer networks, computer resources, communication devices, as also data and information in the electronic form. That being so, it can be argued that blockchain is legal thanks to the electronic format being legal by virtue of Section 4 of the Information Technology Act 2000. Hence, in case if there's any legal dispute around blockchain, we could increasingly rely upon the provisions of blockchain as an emerging technology for this purpose of granting legality to blockchain. However, as we go deeper, we find that though the legality of blockchain can be established within the parameters of the Information Technology Act, specific nuances pertaining to blockchains are not specifically covered under the Indian Cyberlaw. Today, blockchain is often based upon the entire concept of automated smart contracts. Hence, the issue for consideration is whether smart contract is legal in the country or not. In India, contracts are governed by the Indian Contract Act. This particular legislation of more than 150 years old has given legality to contracts in the stocks of electronic offer, normal acceptance, leading into a valid binding electronic contract, including normal contract. The electronic component of the contract became further substantially clarified once the IT Act granted legality to the electronic format. So today, electronic contracts are covered under the ambit of the IT Act. But is a smart contract or a blockchain contract covered under the ambit of the IT Act? Well, that's a gray area for which there is need for sufficient clarity. If you look at the US, some of the states in the US have now come up with laws that have specifically stipulated blockchain-related contracts or smart contracts. Similarly, when one looks at some of the laws that have been passed in countries like Malta, like Estonia, and in Switzerland, we find that increasingly countries are not only granting enabling legal frameworks specifically focused on blockchain, but more significantly, provisions pertaining to smart contracts have also been effectively covered. So, smart contracts are legal in a number of countries thanks to these new legal frameworks, But in India, we are in a gray zone. It will be hard for any proponent of a smart contract to specifically argue that the smart contract is legal, because the contract has certain salient features, because the contract must be done with the free will of the parties. For proving free will in a smart contract, the onus of proof will certainly become far more heavier. The existing legal frameworks on contracts are not particularly very helpful in proving the legality of smart contracts. So I think as we go forward, as a nation, we have a lot of homework to do. Blockchain is now beginning to have lesser media coverage, but is increasingly becoming part of central mainstream of digital ecosystem. That being so, it will be advisable that India should go ahead and come up with specific clarity, not just going ahead and clarifying that blockchain is legal as a technology, but also to further ensure and stipulate that blockchain contracts are also legal. And for that, we will have to make up with some provisions. We could either come up these provisions with the amendments under the Information Technology Act, because the IT Act is a special piece of legislation. Section 81 of the IT Act categorically says that this is a special legislation and that the provisions of this legislation prevail over anything inconsistent therewith, contained in any other law for the time being in force. So we could either amend the IT Act and come up with substantial clarity on blockchains, specifically blockchain contracts or smart contracts. And because Section 81 gives superseding impact and effect to the provisions of the IT Act, the provisions pertaining to smart contracts in the IT Act could even go ahead and prevail over the inconsistent portions of the Indian Contract Act. But for that, there's need for political will. Similarly now, blockchain is increasingly being used in a vast variety of human applications, of activities in the digital ecosystem. And I think for getting more impetus to these activities, it is imperative that appropriate frameworks must be put in place. We recently had this international conference on cyberlaw, cybercrime, and cybersecurity from 20th to 22nd November in New Delhi, where we looked at the legality of blockchains and the distinctive legal challenges that blockchains are now beginning to throw up. Well, blockchains stand for transparency, accountability, and that being so, people believe that blockchains are sacrosanct. Well, a lot of people also believe that accountability is 100% secure. But increasingly, there are now new reports coming in that blockchain is also being used for some cybercrime activity. Just because information is available in the public domain does not necessarily mean that it will deter all stakeholders from refraining from doing illegal activities. So the potentiality of blockchain usage for cybercrime or other cybersecurity breaches cannot be ruled out, although the traceability will become far more easier. But clearly, homework needs to be done. The legal frameworks currently are not really tailor-made from the perspective of blockchain. I particularly believe that the Information Technology Act 2000 needs a distinctive overhaul given the blockchain ecosystem. Why only blockchain now, given the advent of newly emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, cybersecurity? So as a nation, we need to give that as a number one focus, because if we do that, we are going to give immense impetus to the growth of the blockchain economy and blockchain activities within the country as well. Bitcoins have had a rough weather. Well, they were, seen from another perspective, Bitcoins were actually asking for trouble. The volatility of their pricing and the speculativeness of the said crypto assets or cryptocurrencies clearly told all the regulatory stakeholders that this is going to be very hot property to deal with. So a lot of countries actually are fearing bitcoins primarily because they have no control. Some countries actually feel that bitcoins could effectively be prejudicially impacting their security, sovereignty, or integrity. Also, with bitcoins becoming the de facto electronic currency in the darknet, countries of the world are increasingly concerned that this could be impacting their nation and their cyber sovereignty as well. So consequently, currently it's a very knee-jerk reaction. You suddenly say Bitcoin is illegal. The fact that in India, the Reserve Bank of India effectively mandated banks not to offer banking services to any stakeholders who are using Bitcoins as a crypto asset or a cryptocurrency effectively created a stranglehold on the Bitcoin economy. A lot of Indians had actually invested in Bitcoins, and post demonetization, that was a good way for channelizing your so-called unaccounted wealth. But with now increasingly the government coming down very strongly on Bitcoins, India saw actually a transmigration of Bitcoin uh, investors moving out of India and going to other jurisdictions. So what was India's loss was other jurisdictions' gain, whether it was Dubai or Singapore. I think India as a nation needs to learn from its follies in history. See, blockchain is here to stay. Which digital crypto asset currency will stay, it's hard to believe. But potentially, I believe India could also take a leaf from some of the examples that other countries have actually engaged in terms of their experience. Let me share with you the case pertaining to Belarus. Where further SOPs or various other encouragements can be given to people for the purposes of using blockchains. We could take some bit of that learnings of the Belarus experience to find out what effectively would or would not work in India. Similarly, we can also learn from the 3 blockchain legislations that Malta had passed last year so as to emerge as the blockchain island of the world. Malta has come up with its own distinctive approach of coming up with a dedicated regulatory authority to oversee the further growth and enablement of blockchain. So clearly, blockchain as a technology is having various new legal approaches that countries are adopting in the context of the same. Now, India needs to learn that it should not do a mere cut and paste. India needs to learn that it will have to somehow customize or Indianize the experience of other countries as it moves forward. But clearly, I'm of the firm opinion that India will have to act quickly. Already countries like Estonia is doing remarkably well in terms of coming up with enabling regulatory and legal frameworks for promoting blockchain. Country like Switzerland has done a lot of work in promoting blockchain. Malta is, of course, a thought leader. Belarus is indeed yet another thought leader in this space. So it will be good if India looks at a cumulative experience of all these countries and comes up with an Indianized model which not only legalizes the blockchain contract or smart contract, but also provides adequate minimal enablement and minimal possible regulation in the context of blockchain. Well, sometimes we can also look at what experiment is happening in some US states. Some US states in their state laws have effectively gone ahead and said that blockchain could be used as a technology for accounting purposes. But clearly, whether we'll be able to do that in our country will be dependent on what will be the political will of the political masters at the appropriate time. So all said and done, the timing is now ripe. In fact, we are late. The train has already left the platform, but still we can do some remedial action. The moment we are able to give enabling legal frameworks to blockchain, the moment we are able to give legality to smart contracts and making amendments in the existing law, the better it will be ultimately for the Indian blockchain ecosystem, for strengthening it, and for growing it to different levels. At the end of the day, it will all ultimately depend upon the political will of the government of the day. A lot of governments do not necessarily see blockchain as an urgent priority. And I think that's also lack of appropriate exposure to the governments. Blockchain is a game changer. Blockchain can potentially change the face of electronic governance across the face of the planet. However, blockchain would require minimal enablement, minimal regulation, and also the mind share of lawmakers and thought leaders across the world as we go forward. It'll all be very interesting to see how these developments take place. But that's currently what things are. Let's hope we are able to see more quicker action. But till such time that doesn't take place, to all the blockchain ecosystem enthusiasts that are attending this conference, please keep in mind that you can fall back upon the broad ambit and the framework that's provided under the Information Technology Act and also rules and regulations. And in case if you as a stakeholder are providing blockchain services, then you will also have to quickly realize that you have become an intermediary under Section 21W of the IT Act. And having said that, you will be required to ensure compliances with the said statutory provisions of law. So please ensure that you and your operations are on the right side of the law. And because you're an intermediary, if you comply with the law is going to provide you statutory exemption or immunity from liability. And I will encourage all of you working in this direction to look at coming up with strong legal documentation so as to promote your statutory immunity from legal liability. It's interesting days yet. A lot of work has yet to be done. So the quicker the government comes to the aid of strengthening the blockchain ecosystem, of appropriately addressing the legalities thereof, I think ultimately that's going to be a big shot in the arm for the ecosystem that's dependent and reliant upon blockchain as a technology. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It was nice talking with you.